Okay, well firstly I'd really like to welcome Edwina back. She has visited college, is it a couple of times?
A couple of times
before?
now, yeah.
She's a big supporter of Oldham Sixth Form, and thank you so much for joining us again. And thank you to you all. I hope you've got some good questions prepared, especially in light of current politics. I'm sure you won't be short of things to ask Edwina's opinion on. But a very brief introduction. Edwina is a former Conservative politician, groundbreaking woman, served under our first female Prime Minister back in the 80s. And obviously we had Angela Rayner in recently, who answered some great questions on females' stances in politics. And you have continued your career since your political career. You might recognise Edwina from your extensive...
I'm a celebrity is what she's trying to say.
Yeah, from professionally trying to say, do you remember when she ate bugs and I'm a celebrity? But no, you've done Strictly, and she had a very impressive appearance on Wife Swap, which I remember watching.
Yeah.
And you were Mastermind, so
I've won Mastermind twice.
You have
Let's get it right.
a large media presence still, and you are still involved politically in some aspects, aren't you? So. Yes, so I'm hoping you've got some good questions. Would you like to...
Shall I start off by telling you a little bit about how I got here? Because I imagine I haven't seen most of you before. I think the first time I was here was 2016. I'm a Scouser, right? So don't mess with me. For those of you that don't know, Scouser means I come from Liverpool originally. Okay, and I went to the same school as a couple of members of the Beatles. That's my generation. And I was very fortunate in many ways. I was encouraged at school. I got a scholarship to go to Oxford, and I was able to read philosophy, politics and economics while I was there. Mixed with a lot of people who were very different from me, because my family doesn't have any money. My dad had a shop in the centre of Liverpool. And it was a very different world in many ways. I did a total of 11 years on Birmingham City Council, so I'm accustomed to being involved with an institution like this. I taught, I was a college lecturer at a College of Further Education in London, and I became a Member of Parliament, as you say. In 1983, I entered Parliament on the same day as Jeremy Corbyn. And he never said hello to me then, and he's never said hello to me since. My opinion of him is determined to some extent by what I know of him. It was also the same day as Tony Blair, same day as, well, quite a lot of other people. Yeah. So it was quite an intake that year. I've been a member of the Conservative Party since I was 16. The reason being that the city I was growing up in was being wrecked by strikes. We had strikes on the docks, we had strikes in the motor factories. We were really struggling very hard, and strikes damaged the lives of ordinary people, those who actually use those services. And I hated the idea that we were being pushed into a certain way of life and a certain way of living, and the kind of striving that I'd been brought up for, and the kind of feeling that you had to do your best, and your best would take you anywhere you wanted, and when you got there then you had a duty to put something back into society. That was the way I was brought up, and that took me to the Conservative Party, where I have stayed ever since. And it can be interesting, and you've worked out what your principles are and which party you feel reflects them. It's then interesting to see to what extent the current issues match your principles and your values. Currently, I am president of High Peak Conservative Association, which is a seat that's marginal. We won it, then we lost it, and it's currently a Labour seat with a Member of Parliament who's a strong Corbynite. So that's who I am, and that's what I do. All right? And I won Celebrity Mastermind twice.
I'm so sorry.
Not just once, twice.
How awful of it twice.
There you go. Right, okay, so shall we open it up? And
absolutely. So, who would like to
you take over, ask your questions, make your points, and let's see how we get on.
I'm sure you're all burning with questions.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask what you think about the current Conservative Party leadership campaign, and who you think will be the best leader, who you think will be the best job at uniting the party in the country.
What do I think about the current Conservative Party leadership campaign, and who do I think would be best? and you mentioned uniting the country. It's a head-in-hands exercise. God. There's 10 of them. Flipping heck. I think by the end of the week, the first vote in Parliament will be done Thursday lunchtime. And I think by Thursday night, quite a lot of them will have dropped out. We'll probably be down to about 5 or 6. My guess is that then there'll probably be another round and we'll be down to probably 4. They've got to get down to 2. The party membership in the country thinks that's outrageous. We would like to have a choice of 3 or 4. But that's the way the rules are. The top 3 or 4 are probably going to be Boris, probably Jeremy Hunt, possibly Dominic Raab, and possibly one other. And I do hope it's Sajid Javid, because he's got a very interesting background, not dissimilar to mine. I mean, I come from an immigrant background. My grandparents were immigrants over 100 years ago, but immigrant families tend to be strivers and to work hard, and they know all about discrimination, and they know all about the tough side of life. And then, you know, when they rise, we have a lot to contribute, let's put it like that. So I'd be interested to have Sajid Javid. The trouble is, in that little lot, one of them's a good speaker, and that's Boris. And the trouble with Boris is that's probably the best you can say about him. He doesn't strike me as having the grit, the backbone, the quality of personality to make a great Prime Minister. Plus the work ethic, right? Margaret Thatcher would be up at dawn at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she'd be working till after midnight, scurrying around doing all these red boxes as I've got all the paperwork in. And you actually have to have the capacity for an enormous amount of hard work. Boris even delivers his Daily Telegraph article late. So I'm not sure he's actually got the qualities necessary. He's a great campaigner, great campaigner. If I were Prime Minister, I would make him chairman of the party, so that all he has to do is go scurrying around making speeches. And there's no salary attached to that, so it'd be great if he goes on writing articles. Jeremy Hunt, I think, has got all those necessary qualities, but he's terribly dull. Michael Gove, I don't think, is going to make the cut. I don't think you can honestly say, yeah, I used to give parties where there was lots of dope. More than once. And yes, I took it. And yes, at the same time, I was writing articles about how it's a bad thing to do. And I don't think that washes. That's, you know, you will all be offered dodgy substances. If you value the state of your brain and your mental state, don't touch them. Any of them, right? I know there's a kind of organised hypocrisy that goes on. I'm going to be talking on the Moral Maze tomorrow night on BBC Radio 4. And my line is going to be, well, you know, we Tory party members, we really disapprove of people taking drugs. Absolutely right. I tell you, hey, this is a frightfully good claret, isn't it? You know, or gin and tonic or whatever it is. There's a lot of hypocrisy about this generally. But I don't think the party membership likes the idea of somebody who has been a regular user of stuff that comes from Colombia and has got blood on it, and then wants to be holding the highest office of honour in our country. So I don't think he's going to do it. Dominic Raab is interesting, again, immigrant background. His dad was a Holocaust survivor. His views are a bit uptight, strikes me. But he would do Brexit. The first job of anyone that leads the country has got to be, you've got to get Brexit done. Get it done, get it done, get it out of the way, and then you can argue about everything else. So I haven't declared, and I will wait and see who we're offered. I don't think it's going to be any of the women, not this time. There's always this prejudice that says, well, a woman failed, so we're not going to have another woman. They never say a man failed, so we're not going to have another man, do they? No. We live in an unfair world, we really do. Right.
Next question. You've definitely brought up some topics for discussion.
Go on.
I wondered what you thought about possibly reforming the electoral system from something other than first past the post, because As a politics student, we've learned about a lot of the faults with first past the post.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you like that system or if you'd favour something else.
What do I think? Could we reform the system to something other than first past the post? The answer is no. And the reason is because if you look at recent history, we had a coalition government that was formed in 2010. And part of the deal, it was between Cameron and the Conservatives, who were the largest party, and the Lib Dems, led by Nick Clegg. And there was a formal deal, formal coalition agreement. And part of that was to have a referendum as soon as possible on an alternative voting system, which was taken to the country, and 2/3 voted to stick with first past the post. And we're not going to do it again, or at least not until you are probably closer to my age. It's not, why? The debate at the time was really very interesting, because first past the post means whoever gets the most votes wins. And we've had a system like that in this country since forever. All right, so it has a long history. Its weaknesses are understood. Its strengths are that it obliges everybody to coalesce into the main parties. And we've just seen Change UK come and go. That coalescence into the main parties means there are intense discussions within the main parties that come to understandings about big issues like where you spend your budget and how you tax people and where the tax money goes. And they're done within parties, not trying to get the electorate to make judgments like that. It seems to me that's an enormous strength. The other enormous strength is you don't have losers running things. The reason that any alternative proportional representation failed was that you end up with losers calling the shots. The people who didn't get the votes helped to produce the majority, and that's bad news. So, for example, we've had, because we've had hung parliaments recently, we've had the DUP appearing to call the shots in this current parliament. I don't think they are, because I don't think they would do anything to put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. So I think we could be a lot more cynical about where the DUP stand. But nonetheless, the feeling is that one of the most divisive parties in the whole country, and particularly one of the most divisive parties in Northern Ireland, are trying to tell the whole of the rest of the UK what to do. If we had a general election now, the odds are that either Labour or Tories would be the largest party. We might have another hung parliament, and Labour would go into coalition of some kind with the SNP. They say they would not, and the SNP say they would not. But can I just give you a little bit of advice? Never believe a word politicians say before elections, right? They would, which would mean that Scotland, and not all of Scotland, but a proportion of Scotland, of Scottish voters, would be telling people in Liverpool and Oldham and Manchester and Dorset what to do. And that's not a great idea. That's not a great principle on which to base democracy. So first past the post has its faults, that's absolutely true. But it's not a bad system. And when you look at coalitions in many countries, Israel's an example, you end up with the most extreme parties calling the shots. And that can be horrible, because there's nothing you can do about it. You cannot, you need their votes. So you have to be nice to, excuse me everybody, you have to be nice to a bunch of shits. And that's not what you want. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan. Anybody else? Next question.
I will ask you. Oh yes, go ahead.
Do you think there should be a second Brexit referendum?
Do I think there should be a second Brexit referendum? This is another head in hand. Oh, God, no. Oh.
It was bound to come up.
I know, no, you're absolutely right. No, for a couple of reasons. The first is that we had a referendum. 33 million people voted. The turnout was enormous. In the high peak, the turnout was 5% higher than it had been at the hard-fought general election only a year before. People voted for all sorts of reasons. I was a Remain campaigner. I was here as a Remain campaigner. Your local MP, Labour MP, was a Leave campaigner,
Yeah.
and he was here. And we treated each other with courtesy, did we not?
You did. I think you did very well, though. I hear Edwina.
But we've had one. And what people expect is that we carry out what was voted for. And I was on the losing side, but I still think that. And if you don't, then a very large chunk of the population loses faith in the political system. And that's a dangerous state to be in, to have people who won't vote because it doesn't make any difference. Whatever you vote for, they won't do it. Do you see what I'm getting at? We can all understand a system in which we voted, we can't get what we wanted because we lost. Because there's always another opportunity for general elections, yeah? But with a referendum, it's supposed to be one-off. If we had another one, what would be the question? Same again? And what happens if you get the same result again? What happens if it's a different question? It's tweaked in some way to get a different answer. That's a real, that's two fingers to the electorate. I get very cross when I hear people who are still Remain campaigners talking about 17.5 million people as if they were stupid. You know, the voters are not stupid. They may have voted for something that you don't agree with, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. And it was particularly hard for people like me. I'm an economist and a Remain campaigner, to get my head around the idea that somebody would vote on a sense of identity as much more important than anything else. Right? But they did. So I have to accept that. And when people like Philip Hammond have said, well, I don't think people voted to make themselves poorer. They didn't give a toss. They voted because they felt British. And being British meant something very profound to them. And that's something that I think we have to try and understand and respect. Your parents, your grandparents, your neighbours are possibly old and voted to leave, yeah? Yeah, well, there's plenty of them, people around here. The people you go into the shop with, the people you sit next to in the cinema, they probably voted leave. And you need to understand why. And here again, here's a positive, if you like. Because one of the aspects of that sense of identity is that Britain has not been invaded for 1,000 years. If you don't learn about 1066 at college, you should. That was the last time this country was successfully invaded and occupied. By this country, I mean mainly England, because the English have been the occupiers in many other countries. All right? It didn't happen in Scotland. Scotland happened because the King of Scotland became the King of England. All right? But it's true of Ireland, it's true of Wales, it's true of many other parts of the world. But that sense of English identity, of British identity, has been very profound, and it has led to a huge sense of independence, making up our own minds, taking our own decisions. One of the first countries in the world to abolish slavery and to enforce it. One of the first countries in the world to identify and abolish modern slavery and to enforce it. There's a whole host of good stuff that come out of that. And we've just celebrated 75th anniversary of D-Day. The British did not need to go back into Europe to clear out fascism. They chose to do it. And that choice came from being a free country and wanting our neighbours to be free. I think that's astonishing. But it also means two fingers to Brussels. Does that make sense? Sorry, that's rather a long answer. There you go. I'm trying not to make speeches. Let me get a view from you. Now think about the leadership candidates, and I'll mention just a few names, all right? I want you all to shut your eyes so you can't see how other people are voting. You too. How many of you would want to see, I'm going to say, vote by putting one hand up. How many of you would want to see Boris as Prime Minister of this country? Close your eyes. Hands up. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. How many of you would like to see Sayed Javed as leader of this country? Yeah. Yep. How many of you would want to see Jeremy Hunt as leader of the country? Okay, I think I'll stop there while the going is good. Thank you all. You can open your eyes now. It may interest you to know I asked those questions at 2 Conservative Party events over the weekend, one in Stockport and one in Leeds. And in Stockport, Boris had support of about a quarter of the people there, which was a surprise. I thought it would be higher. That was a Conservative seat. And in Leeds, which was much more not Conservative area, he had the support of about a third. So you compute that. So it'll be very interesting to see how that gets on. Okay, next question.
Anybody else?
Oh yes. Right, who's next? Yes, sir.
In 1983, when you became an MP, I was 16. I started my politics A-level in that year, and we were taught a lot about parties and class de-alignment. In other words, that where there were previously strong alignments to political parties, a two-party system largely based on social class, that was sort of fragmenting. And so I remember writing an essay in my exam on that topic. It was the Essex School of Political Scientists that came out with a lot of this thinking, Ivor Crewe, etc.
Yeah.
And actually, that hasn't really happened in the sense that we've maintained a two-party system until around 2010. I know the 70s there were bits of coalitions then, but you get a coalition in 2010 that you've referred to, and the most recent arrangement with the DUP. And then the elections this year, which have been very interesting. I know that European elections often don't really end up replicating what happens in the general election. So my question is, are we actually now seeing the end of the two-party system?
Are we seeing the end of a two-party system?
Is it possible that finally the whole thing is fragmenting?
People, let's start off by saying that the voters in the United Kingdom, 35 million, are amongst the most sophisticated and shrewd voters anywhere in the world. They're a lot smarter, I think, than they are in the United States. And we get much higher turnouts much of the time than they do in many parts of the, certainly in the States. And they understand which election they're voting in. All right? So when an opinion poll says, oh, the Brexit general election, no. The question is, if there were a general election tomorrow, how would you vote? Which is not the same as saying, it's a general election, here's your ballot paper, you are choosing the next government. It's an expression of opinion, not a vote. Yeah, there is a difference. And people are splitting in all sorts of ways. It really is, for student politics, fascinating. There's always going to be an element of class, or class, as they say in some parts of the country. There'll always be an element of voting in the sense of voting in your own interests, right? So if you come from a poor background, you may well want to see an increase in benefits. Why? Because you may have families who are totally dependent on benefits. If you come from a rich background, you will want to see a cut in taxes. Why? Because you pay a lot, right? The two things are mutually incompatible. You either have the tax income and you're spending it on something like benefit. So you'll get that, and that diversity has been in existence since the welfare state came in the 1940s, right? You will also get increasingly now an age difference. And that is because the needs of younger people are different from the needs of older people, and they are in competition again. So what you would all love is free education for as long as you want it, which you would get in some countries, but there wouldn't be very many of you. And what pensioners want is free TV licenses and a few other things like pensions until we're 106. Inflation proofed, is that clear? Right? And you can't, there isn't the money to do both. Actually, there is the money at the moment to do both, but the strain then shows up in other parts, like in the health service, or cutting the number of teachers, or cutting the number of police officers. So there are big strains going on there, but what you're tending to find is that older people will be more likely to vote for Brexit and younger people will vote against Brexit. So you get that. You're getting a divide north and south. And that's partly because the south tends to be very much more prosperous. If you go from Oldham to a university based in somewhere like Bournemouth, you will be astonished. The prosperity, the cleanliness, the style, the expense, the cost. I mean, John McDonnell was interviewed in one of the Sunday papers the other week in a pop-up place in his constituency, which I think is somewhere like Hammersmith. And all the breakfasts are up on the wall. And there isn't a breakfast under £5. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's London. And people, why is it £5 for a basic breakfast? Because people can afford to pay that. It's very different round here. So we're getting that north-south divide. And tragically, because most of the lawmakers are based in London, and that's true of the Labour Party as well, the decisions are not being made to benefit up here. We had quite a long run with the Northern Powerhouse because the Chancellor of the Exchequer had a northern seat, so he's on the train every week, and he can see that the trains are packed and we need HS2 and so on. And that's gone, and he's gone back down to London, and that drive has gone. So you get these divisions. Brexit is a big division at the moment, and it will continue to be until it's done. Once it's done, the other economic arguments, I think, will then come into operation once more. And there will be an element of judgment on politicians as to whether they have actually made promises they can keep and have kept them.
Can I come back and just
Yeah.
a couple of observations? I mean, the first is the European elections. Labour won 14% of the vote and the Tories won 9%.
Awful, yeah, I know.
Which is kind of unprecedented. I think
Yeah.
UKIP won the previous European elections, but,
Yeah.
but the two main parties getting less than a quarter of the vote was astonishing. I was at the count for the local elections in Oldham in May, and what I noticed there was the increasing number of independent candidates that were standing to become councillors. We had a party called Saddleworth First, which
Party called?
Saddleworth First. Saddleworth have got, there's 3 wards in Oldham in Saddleworth. Okay. Now on top of UKIP that actually did quite well in the local council, the Green Party did okay, etc. So I keep reading this word existential, that the main parties are going through a kind of existential crisis.
Yeah.
And I suppose going back, my point is really, I've never known anything like this in my 50-odd years,
Yeah.
in the sense that the glue that holds the two main parties together doesn't feel as strong, and I just, is it just Brexit?
Well, it mostly Brexit, I think, but also it's a feeling of anger and perhaps even despair at the leadership of the two main parties. And I say the two main parties. I mean, Theresa May did all sorts of red lines and all the rest of it, and we should have left on March the 29th. And we would be coming out of whatever difficulty there had been, and we would be looking to make our own trade deals and all the rest of it. I have faith that, even though I was a Remain campaigner, I have faith in this country and the initiative and the energy and the drive of many of its people running businesses up and down the country, that we will make a success of whatever circumstances we find themselves in. It's the not knowing that is a real pain, and not knowing has continued because we haven't been able to achieve it, all right? But Corbyn carries a lot of responsibility for that, that sense of frustration and despair. If Corbyn was a different kind of leader, Labour would be streaks ahead in the poll. But he's a Marxist, which means that a lot of Labour people don't trust him. He believes in total disruption of the economy by taking over, by nationalising large chunks of the economy. It's an extraordinary old-fashioned way of doing things. Just because you own something doesn't mean you know how to run it, right? And the people who know how to run it should be allowed, in my view, to get on with it with relatively little interference. Plus it distracts you. The money then goes into whatever you're running. I'll give you an example. When I first became elected, I was elected to a coal mining constituency. And the biggest noise on the block was Arthur Scargill, who was also communist. And my constituents voted to stay at work. I had nothing to do with it. And when eventually I asked them in the miners' welfare quietly, what's going on here, you know? And they said, well, we hear all this about rolling back tides of Thatcherism from Mr. Scargill. People around here voted for tides of Thatcherism, Edwina, that's why you're here. And I said, what about the pits, which were being heavily subsidised? And they said, we're digging dirt down there and it's dangerous. Your job is to get us something else to do. And eventually the pits were closed and Toyota arrived. And yes, it wasn't them so much, but their sons and daughters had something else to do. So the point that I'm making is that if you have a highly divisive, hardline character leading the Labour Party, large numbers of people that would normally vote Labour won't or don't like it. If you add to that a leader that seems to be quite equivocal about anti-Semitism, and you are going to lose, well, there aren't many Jews in the country, about 250,000, but you're going to lose an awful lot of other people that think that anti-Semitism is appalling, and that kind of choosing who your voters should be is inherently offensive, right? The idea being that, well, if you're anti-Jewish, maybe you'll win the Muslim vote. That insults Muslims, but it's an argument for a divisive world, whereas the Labour Party was always taking their moral high ground on being inclusive. So I think Corbyn and his little clique of quite unpleasant people carry a lot of the blame for that as well. But we shall see. It's several years before we have to have a general election, and if we can get Brexit out of the way, things may change again.
Okay.
Yes.
Again?
Yeah, to do with Brexit.
Yeah.
So would you rather that another 1 or 2 years goes on of what we've been seeing, or would you rather that we go out with a no deal in October?
Would I rather another 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. And if that went on, then we would get a deal to
Yeah.
the EU, or would you rather?
It's such a good question. Bear this in mind. There is, in a sense, no such thing as a no-deal exit, because we would leave on WTO terms. And there's been quite a lot of discussion of exactly how that would work. To my mind, what you would have to do, supposing you're the Brexit minister, you have to make it absolutely clear that the day we leave, we are not going to put tariffs up against any goods coming in from the EU. Right? We continue to trade on exactly the same basis, and that perhaps for 2 years we will continue to trade on the same standards. That we will not import anything that from other countries that contravenes those standards. And you have to give it a time limit, I think. All right? Not least because you're talking to America and their standards are very different. You're also talking to China and their standards are very different. But during that period, you are negotiating as many deals as you can, and deals take a while. Bear this in mind, the withdrawal deal wasn't a deal. It was just, if you read it, and I have read it, hundreds of pages of it, it is the most boring stuff. Page after page is about goods in transit during the transition period, and who should carry the insurance for it, and what happens if something goes wrong. It's not about a trade deal. The trade deal will be negotiated during that period. Oh my God, you know. As for Northern Ireland and the border, I think there's a lot of hooey talked about this. If you're driving your car across that border, you can be stopped for speeding on either side. They can do number plate recognition on either side. You try bringing in smuggled tobacco, and you may or may not be stopped. You try bringing in anything to do with terrorism, and the guards and the police cooperate full time, and you will be stopped. which is something we should be very thankful for. That's why we haven't had so many atrocities in recent years. So that infrastructure's there. You already have to register. This system's been in existence for 2 years now. If you are trading across that border, you have to register. So I can't see quite what the issue is, unless somebody wants it to be an issue. All right? There is a similar border, Norway to Sweden. All right? As you drive up to that border with your lorry, you have a text message on your phone, you're the lorry driver, you show it, click, and you're through. It takes an average of 14 seconds. All right? It's 2019. You all have mobile phones. It's not beyond the wit of man or woman to devise a system that works in Northern Ireland, if they want it. If they want it. So I would be happy to go on October 31st. I think the delay is immensely destructive. It's extremely unhelpful to business, and it is immensely destructive to the faith of the political system. And we need our political system. We need it to work, and we need people to have trust in it. Yeah.
So, like, obviously you think that this...
Can you speak up a little bit so I can hear?
So obviously you think that this time period's been very destructive. But would you agree that over the last 3 years, what was promised from a Brexit has not actually happened?
Would I agree over the last 3 years what was promised from Brexit has not actually happened? That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
No,
Yes,
like,
but what else are you trying to say?
but like, would it not be fair for constituents to have another vote?
Explain why having another vote is going to be any different from having the previous vote.
Well, in my opinion, over 3 years a lot has changed. The smooth Brexit that was promised has not been effective. And MPs obviously have been having 3 votes for Theresa May's deal, which is effectively the same thing.
All right, so let me repeat that so that we can pick up the recording. Over the last 3 years, a lot has changed. I mean, we've learned a lot about Brexit. I think that's absolutely right. And nothing has been able to get through Parliament, which is also absolutely true. Yes, but the voters' views don't seem to have changed very much. Every analysis that you do of the voting keeps coming up with the same kind of pattern, about 52% for Brexit, for leaving, and 48% for staying put. I hear sometimes an argument that says, oh, well, we've got people now who are on the voting register, some of you will be here, that weren't on the voting register before. But that's always true. And that's an argument for having endless referenda, which means no government, no decisions of any kind. At some point there have to be some decisions, some action, and then we're able to work on those decisions and move forward. Okay? I don't think the people who voted for Brexit have changed their views. And I think, you know, be careful what you wish for. But I think if another referendum was called on the same terms, you get the same result. And if a referendum was called on different terms, you would have millions of very angry people who would punish the main parties who had acceded to this by voting for it in Parliament. And you really don't want to have a large number of MPs in Parliament led by Nigel Farage. Believe me, you don't. You don't. They haven't got the infrastructure to get anyone elected, but that's only a matter of time. So we have a vested interest, all of us, in ensuring that the main political system is sound.
Do you think the main political system needs to change?
Do I think that...
Speaking as a young person in politics at the moment, I think we're very confused. There's a big lack of faith in the system.
Yep.
What do you think needs to be done? Do we need a big...
What do we need to improve faith in the system? I think we need politicians to keep their promises. I think we need to have a system, we need to have the personalities, the structure and the decisions, so that when a politician stands up and says, I believe we should do this, and you elect them, they do it. They do it. That was, you know, if you look at recent history, that was Margaret Thatcher's great strength. She didn't promise much, But by God, when she did it, she carried it out. You know, during the miners' strike, she had prepared very carefully for the miners' strike. She had been in government, in cabinet in the 1970s when there had been miners' strikes. She had been in the opposition front bench when there had been miners' strikes, when the threat of strikes would bring a government scuttling to settle. And it was always expensive. And that fed through into inflation in the rest of the economy. When I was doing a job a bit like yours, as a lecturer in a college of further education, we got a pay rise. We got a 24% pay rise to keep up with inflation. And the following year, inflation was about 24%. So we've been paid in paper money. That was the outcome of that kind of system. And Margaret thought about it long and hard, figured out how to withstand the miners' strike of 12 months, figured out that the miners couldn't withstand a strike of 12 months, and went for it. And I was one of the MPs that went to see her and said, my lot are working. You won't let them down, will you? And she said, no, we will get on to the end. And you think, that's terrifying. It's called resolve. But she did it. And as a result, she was then able, because she then had the trust of the country. We had a majority of 144. And we went on to win the next election with another huge majority. So that's what we need, is politicians who make promises they can keep. And I'd add one more thing. There's far too much virtue signalling going on, right? You don't signal your virtue by what you say. You signal your virtue by what you do. And that applies in all the main parties. So this may sound a little one-sided, but it applies generally. It's all very well the Labour Party talking about equality. They've never elected a woman as leader of the party, ever. Right? They have managed to officially back one side in the argument between Palestine and Israel without realising how much offence that can cause to another side. You need to be clever sometimes in politics not to upset people, yeah. But virtue signalling I find quite distasteful. The argument at the moment about whether you're a feminist or not. I'm not a feminist. I've never been a feminist. I believe in equality for all of us. I believe in equality for you, right? I believe in equality for older people. I have campaigned for gay rights. I'm not gay. Read my novels, you'll discover that. I believe that we should all be treated equally under the law, and that the law should not discriminate. But I'm not a believer in equality of outcomes, because where you get to in life should depend on how hard you work, on how you use your opportunities, and the choices that you make, right? But I'm not a feminist, because I don't like the way the feminists campaign. I don't like the way they seem to blame all the failures of women on men. Yeah? I don't like the idea that they run down motherhood, which is the experience that women share around the world. If you are a feminist, fine, I respect that. But I'm not virtue signalling. I'm not doing it. Yes, sir.
So do you believe in gender equality?
Do I believe in
Gender equality.
gender equality? It depends which bit of it you're talking about.
Would you say that's not fair?
Well, for example, if people do the same job, they should get paid the same money. And I started work before that was even the law. And I marched in and insisted on it. And not only that, but I insisted I got the same pension rights as all my male colleagues. I joined a firm that believed passionately in recruiting women in 1969. And they had 55 new graduate trainees, 2 of which were women. 2! More than one. No, I wasn't a token woman. But when you look at, say, the gender pay gap, much of the debate on that, I think, is a little ill-informed. If you look at people at entry level and in their 20s and 30s, there is no gender pay gap. It tends to open up later on because men will tend to have a continuous career and women will have a disrupted career. And this applies right through all the professions. So you have, we train a lot of doctors, but because half the people we train now are women and because they go part-time, we need to train even more doctors. Now that's a responsibility as a state we should accept. But it does mean that you're likely to find that in their 40s and early 50s that you're going to have more men in the senior jobs. What do you do about that? Tackle any kind of discrimination the moment you find it, and that particularly in the recruitment process. Encourage those who appear to be disadvantaged to have more confidence and more assertive, people to go for promotion, encourage people to get training, make the training appropriate for whichever position they're in, and keep going, because actually women start to catch up in their 50s. And you may well find that in the 50s there are more women working full-time in places like Liverpool, for example, than men. So the longer that this goes on, the more it equalises. But do I want men and women to have the same career pattern? What happens to the kids? You know, where somewhere along the line, actually looking after children or looking after a disabled person or an elderly person is an honourable and good thing to do. And that needs to be recognised as a valued choice as well.
Why are you not a feminist then?
Sorry, say why is?
Why aren't you a feminist? Like, what part of it?
Why am I not a feminist? Partly because when I was, you make these choices when you're often in your teens, yeah? And at that time, the serious issue that was wrecking Liverpool wasn't feminism. Oh my. The serious issue that was wrecking Liverpool was strike actions and militant trade unions. Okay. It seemed, as I came into the 1970s and we chose a woman prime minister, it seemed to me that people who were campaigning in quite aggressive terms, apparently, were missing the plot. The opportunities have always been there. You want to be a woman MP? Stand for Parliament. Don't just stand up and make a speech about how we need more women MPs. Stand, do it. Figure out how it's done. Somebody was talking the other day on Women's Hour about the pink tax, of how women politicians tend to be judged far more on their appearance, and it takes them longer and it costs them more. Oh, for heaven's sake. No, it doesn't. You know, it takes me the same length of time, as you can probably tell, to put my makeup on as it takes one of you to shave. Yeah? You have to look smart and tidy, but you don't have to look as if you haven't got a hair out of place. In other words, for me, the way feminists campaign is negative, abrasive, it's divisive, and it's often plain wrong. And if you look at the Forces Society study that was published in 2016, and they asked people were they feminists or did they identify as feminists, only 9% of women identified as feminists. The rest of them were getting on with being successful women. The difference.
Do you actually believe in gender equality?
Do I believe in gender equality? What do you mean by? What does the sentence mean?
We are running out of time and there is a workshop at 1. If you are burning to ask more questions, do come along at 1. But in the interest of making sure, if you want a photo, I think it would be nice to get photos for 5 minutes.
Let me just summarise in one sentence. I believe we're all children of God, and that we're not born equal, but the state makes an effort to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity. It does so by helping to provide money and free education and so on. And from there on, and I don't make a distinction between men and women. Do you see? I don't divide society up into one group and another and say they're mutually exclusive and their interests are mutually exclusive. No, they're not. No, they're not. We are all individuals. And after that, it's up to us.
But you just said that you didn't think that the career paths of men and women should be the same.
No, I didn't say that. I said that they aren't the same.
Right, I am going to stop there. Please
You
do
will
come
find
along
that.
with
You will
me.
find that. You will find that. And you will have choices to make.
We're in room 97 at 1, debating.
This would be a good subject for debate.
An amazing subject for debate. So please do come along if you're interested in carrying this on. Please make sure you have written your team number down. Just hold on a second. I would like to say thank you, Edwina. You are refreshingly honest and it's brilliant. And I hope you can enjoy that. Now, room 97 at 1, and please do stay in the
Come and get a photo.
Who's first?
Yeah, okay.